Good morning, Sec 3 students, Sec 3 history students. This is Ms. Xiao, and this morning I want to teach you on the source-based skill of reliability. What you should have with you is your skills notes on reliability. You can also have your Sec 3 history textbook with you. This will prove helpful for the lesson. At any point, if you want to speed up, slow down, or pause this video to better suit your learning pace, you may do so. Reliability is about whether I can trust a source. And just to recap, a source can we write down? A source is a piece of information that tells us something, and a historical source tells us about the past. So a source is a piece of information, and until this point in your upper secondary history journey, we have used sources to infer, that is, to use this piece of information to learn about the past, that's inference. We have also tried to understand the message of a source. So far we have done inference. The message of the source is the main argument of a source. So not only what does the source tell us, what can we learn, but also what's the main argument or claim or point that the source wants to bring across. And from the main argument or point of a source, we have also learned how to deduce its purpose. That is, does the source want to convince us about something, or criticize someone else, or warn an audience, or educate an audience? So there's a range of goals that a source might want to achieve a piece of information. And recently, we have also learned that we can look at multiple sources and analyze them together. And the most basic skill there is comparison. Compare and contrast. There are two pieces of information. They might both be saying the same thing, and that is a similarity. Or in some way, they might oppose each other, and that is a difference or a disagreement. And the next skill, after these four techniques, the next skill today I want to teach you is reliability. And reliability is about looking at this piece of information. Is it telling me the truth? So I'm going beyond inference. Not only do I want to find out what the piece of information is saying, I want to know whether it's true. We are not just going to blindly take the information wholesale. We will evaluate the information in two ways. The first way you evaluate the information is by using our own contextual knowledge, or by looking at other pieces of information to test this source. And that is called a cross-reference technique, The other way we evaluate this piece of information's credibility, trustworthiness, reliability, the other way we do so is by looking at the information's purpose. Does it have a hidden agenda? And if it does have this hidden agenda, is it therefore inclined to lie to us, to fool us into believing something untrue so that we will fulfill the source's purpose? And that is the other angle by which we analyze reliability. And so today, we are going to explain why a source is reliable or unreliable. And the first technique is cross-reference. That is, in other words, a test. We will test the information of the source using our own knowledge. And another way is to evaluate its provenance. I'm going to change the words here to critical analysis of its provenance. And for short, I'll call this CAP, C-A-P, critical analysis of provenance. There are 4 steps to reliability, and as I go through this lesson, you will see and understand them. So this is sort of a mapping for you to look at the steps in a silo so that when you come back to this set of notes, you have it on the front page. The first step is to ATQ for every single source-based question and use the command word. If the question asks you if the source is reliable, you reply it's reliable. If the question asks you, do you trust the source, you reply I trust or do not trust. If the question asks you about proving, you reply prove or does not prove. So ATQ is the most fundamental starting step for every source-based question. The next step is to draw an inference from the source. That is, what do we learn from the source? What does the source tell us? What can we infer? And this is a necessary step because before we test whether the source is telling the truth, so maybe you could write this down here. This is a necessary step because in order to test if the source is telling the truth, we must establish what the source is saying, right? To know whether it's telling the truth, what is it saying before we can test whether it's true. So that is why the inference step comes next. And following the inference step, we have the cross-reference step, where we look at what the source is saying and we test it. If my knowledge supports what the source is saying, then it is true. The final step, and this is a choice, you could skip this if you don't think there is much to analyze. But I'm going to show you how to do it because this final step is indeed the most deepest level of thinking for this skill, the critical analysis of provenance. We will establish the source's purpose. So the agenda here, in other words, is purpose. And write this at the side. We have learned purpose through the lens of verb, audience, message, outcome, context. So I will apply this technique here, and now you understand why we are learning reliability off the cuff of the various skills you have learned earlier, because these techniques in reliability map very cleanly onto the techniques of inference, message, purpose, and comparison. Purpose helps us understand the critical analysis of the source's provenance, and comparison is an implicit technique we use when we are doing cross-reference. Because in essence, we are comparing what the source says to our knowledge or to another source's inference. I'll go through this at the rest of the lesson. What does the reliability question actually look like? It can be, is source A is reliable? Can you trust source B? Does source C prove some statement? And is source D credible? So highlight the command words. These command words all indicate a reliability question. And just one thing I'll point out is that when they give you a focus, you must reply to the focus. You must make some sort of inference to this focus. Do not ignore the question focus. That is a recipe for disaster. Focus is given, respond to the focus. For the proving question, it is not a focus. It will be a statement. You still respond to this statement, but it will be a statement. And you will see the proving question later. So the proving question might be something like, does this source prove that Hitler was a great leader? So Hitler was a great leader is a statement. Whereas a focus, maybe I'll just write it down. So a focus could be like Hitler's leadership. That's a focus. And then you could infer something like Hitler's leadership was good, it was bad. So that's a question focus. Whereas a statement, a claim, would be something like Hitler had great leadership. So that is the difference. So a proving question will be phrased in the way where you get a claim, a statement. And then you say, oh yeah, it proves that Hitler has great leadership. Then you give the reason. Or it doesn't prove that Hitler had great leadership. Then you give the reason. Yeah, so that's a proving statement. All right, then at this point, can you, okay, let me go through this and then you try. So for a reliable source, it should be supported by your CK or another source. This is a very important step. And this is what we call the cross-reference. So you can write this down at the side. So the first step here is cross-reference. It could also be a critical analysis of provenance, where the source goes against its own agenda. So can you pause the video and figure out for unreliable sources, what would it look like? Yeah. And so perhaps you have figured it out. For this, it should be challenged or contradicted. You can use either word. And for this, it would be can't be trusted because it is in line. It is in line with sources expected purpose. It's trying to do some sort of political agenda. So these are, broadly speaking, the approaches to analyzing reliability. Page 1 is a setup page. It's a formula page. It's a way for us to look at the question and think, these are the angles by which I enter the question of reliability. I establish what the source is saying, and then I test it. I test it against my knowledge, and then I also look at what the source is saying and I think about its agenda, and I see whether its agenda, what it's saying, is fitting into its agenda or it's going against its own agenda. And then I make my conclusion on reliability. Okay, let's go into the actual meat of the matter. And I have selected the same set of sources from comparison because you are familiar with them, so that we can breeze through the sources by applying the new technique. How did the Nazis maintain control in Germany? Let's do a quick recap at the top. I know that in 1933 Jan, Hitler becomes Chancellor. In February, Reichstag fire. And in March is the Enabling Act. These are the three sort of big moves in 1933 that I need to know. And then maintain control is about political control, and I know that there is propaganda. So there's radio broadcasts, there's the Nuremberg rallies, and then there is also terror, and there's the concentration camps, the Gestapo or secret police arresting opposition. There is okay, maybe we can start here. So let's write down this sort of basic baseline knowledge we know about Nazi Germany, that by March 1933, Hitler more or less has full legal power. There's a legal dictatorship. And from there, he establishes even further control using propaganda and terror. So we have these starting points. Okay, this one about the Führer, you already know. When the old man dies, Hitler combines the role of president and chancellor and says he's the Führer. Führer is German for leader. He's the main leader. And then he has full power, German people. How does he maintain control? And broadly speaking, you have two starting points, propaganda and terror. Okay, and let's look at the first source A. A cartoon published in a British newspaper. Hitler and Göring are with a British serviceman, while Goebbels takes a picture for the press. All right, so you have Hitler and you have Göring, which is a major Nazi leader, and Goebbels is here taking a picture for the press. The press is newspapers, and they look very professional. So I'm just going to write at the top because I can't write at the side, but I suggest you use arrows and you sort of draw arrows and you make annotations on your cartoon, because that really helps you understand. So some things I can see off the bat is Hitler and Göring. So the Nazi leaders, Hitler and Göring, they look very well put together. They look professional. Smiling for the camera. So most likely this is a propaganda picture, showpiece, right, to increase their support. So I have the propaganda here already. It's sort of answering the question of how they manage to maintain control. The other thing I can see is that behind the swastika, huge swastika sign that is concealing, hiding. What are they hiding? Well, I see here sort of a Nazi man strangling a man, beating up another man. There's some fighting, the stars coming out, so violence and violence against. So I see Jew. So it's the violence by Nazis, right? So the Nazi violence against Jews. I have against Catholics, against Protestants. So clearly there are two parts of this cartoon. It's very nicely divided. The front part is the propaganda. I'm looking at the Nazis looking very professional. In fact, they're sitting and over surrounding this British serviceman. A serviceman is a military person. They are concealing from him all the violence and nasty things that are happening behind. They look very professional. Yeah. Okay, great. Study source A. Do you trust what the cartoon says about how the Nazis use mass media? This is the question focus. So I need to respond how the Nazis use mass media. Some ideas that come to mind. What ideas come to your mind? You should pause this video. You should think. One idea that comes to my mind is that Nazis use mass media as propaganda to control Germany, right? Or to fool the British public, or to hide their violence against the German people and opponents. So already from this focus, I can generate three different inferences. Does that make sense? My set trees, do you see that? And any of these inferences are valid. You could infer in these ways. All three are valid inferences. You pick the inference you want to work with, and then you establish whether or not it is true. Again, you pick the inference you want to work with and establish whether or not it is true. So how do I go about doing that? Let's look at this. I can trust the cartoon because it's reasonable in telling me that the Nazis use mass media effectively to establish control over Germany. Let's highlight this. So the first answer I came up with was to use the mass media to get control over Germany, the propaganda angle. This inference is easy to prove true because I know the Nazis were using propaganda. And that is why my DQ will start with can trust. It's reasonable in telling me this, and I can trust this cartoon. I'm going to do a cross-reference technique. I can trust this cartoon because it's supported by my contextual knowledge. So here I need to pull out the goods. I need to come up with some proof and some knowledge and some example that demonstrates that the Nazis did use mass media effectively as propaganda. What knowledge do you have? What knowledge do you have? I have put a hint here. Use textbook page 76 to 77. Can I get you to pause the video? And now you can pull out the textbook and pause the video and try to find it. And I hope you have found it. I found some information. Well, if you did it already, you are good. You can just check that what you picked out is good. Also, I have found that Goebbels, the Nazi minister for propaganda, put up posters and portraits of Hitler across Germany, throughout Germany. The Nazis, held spectacular rallies, marches, and meetings. In Nuremberg, the Nazis invested heavily in the film industry to promote the Nazis' reputation amongst Germans. So all these examples from the posters and portraits to the Nuremberg rallies, to the film industry investment, all of these are precisely your contextual knowledge that you know, or if in this case you might not know off your top of your head, so you use your textbook to pull it out. It is your knowledge that is used, and it must be specific. It must be historically true. These specific historical facts are used to prove that the inference is true. And this whole response becomes one answer. And the whole answer will read as follows. I can trust the cartoon because it's reasonable in telling me that the Nazis used mass media skillfully and effectively to establish control over Germany. Concealing the violent tendencies is evident from source A, which shows Hitler and other Nazis, they are wearing these smart uniforms. They are taking a picture and they're hiding the violence. I can trust the cartoon because it is supported by my contextual knowledge. The Nazis did use the mass media as propaganda. They wanted to brainwash the Germans. For example, Goebbels was Minister of Propaganda. He put up the posters and portraits of Hitler across Germany. They held rallies at Nuremberg. The Nuremberg rallies, the annual Nuremberg rallies. They invested in the film industry to promote the Nazis' reputation. All of these facts have become your knowledge to support the inference, and this would be a strong response. This is a strong response. It is not yet a full mark response. It does not need to be a full mark response if you want to stop here. It is a strong response. Okay. Suppose, so that is here, right? That's the first inference I've picked. So this is inference 1. But suppose you wanted to go with another inference. Suppose, let's say you wanted to go with inference 3 to hide their violence. And suppose you don't think that inference 3 is reliable. Suppose you think that this is a false inference, that the cartoon says that the Nazis are hiding their violence, but actually, Mr. Xiao, I think the Nazis were pretty open about being violent and thuggerish. Why? Didn't they have the stormtroopers, the SA? Weren't they beating up their opponents in the streets since the 1920s? So in what way do we say that the Nazis are being sneaky about this? I don't, like, as a student, you might say, I don't think that the Nazis were hiding it at all. And if you wanted to go with that, how would you write the response? How would you write the response to this question? Do you trust what the cartoon says? Well, you would come from the angle of I do not trust what the cartoon says, and let me teach you how to write that. So, or you could go with I do not trust what the cartoon says because it is one-sided in telling me that the Nazis were concealing their violence and discrimination. And here I would have to highlight that the swastika is hiding the Nazi thugs beating up the Jews, Catholics, and Protestants. This evidence would be the focal point for my inference here. So now I'm looking at a different part of the cartoon to pull out the inference, which is that they are concealing themselves. And you might say, well, Mr. Xiao, I do not trust this cartoon. That's not true because it is, you could say it is challenged. You could say it is contradicted. So you could say it is contradicted. Or you could say it is challenged. Either word will work. Maybe I'll use the word challenge for now. It is challenged by my contextual knowledge. Based on my contextual knowledge, the Nazis did not attempt to conceal their violence and discrimination. I know that the brown shirt SAs were involved in street fights. I know that the Nazis threw Jews in concentration camps. And I know that in the night of the broken glass, the Nazis just told everyone to beat up the Jews. So in what way is that being quiet about it? Well, they were pretty open in the way that they discriminated against people, the way that they were violent. And these examples of violence towards Jews or violence towards opponents are perfect as specific historical facts that would contradict, that would challenge the source and make the source untrustworthy. Okay. At this point, I'm going to pause for for your homework at this point, you will need to copy both sets of this because I want you to get used to writing the cross-reference. In an actual answer, you only pick one side. Either you trust or you do not trust, and then you move into cross-reference. But for homework, you copy both. And so I've taught you here in the video 1, 2, and 3. These are all ATQ inference cross-reference, ATQ inference cross-reference. These are all step 1, step 2, and step 3. So how do we do the critical analysis of provenance? How do we look at the source's agenda? How do we do that? Looking at this British newspaper, I sort of know that the British are I know that British are democracy, and I know that Germany at this point is a legal dictatorship or it is authoritarian. So in this way, looking at this source, I suspect that the British wouldn't be too enamored or happy with or pleased with the German system. Likely they would think that the British democracy is so much better, it's open, it's truthful, the people are really having a vote. And the Germans, they may look so good and so orderly, but they're just hiding all of the nastiness behind the swastika. And in fact, they're not letting foreigners know about it by concealing it. Whereas they use propaganda to present only the professional image of the Nazis, whereas the true vile nature of the violent Nazis are all hidden away from the camera. That is the message of this cartoon, isn't it? That the Nazis are presenting a false, duplicitous, professional image for propaganda purposes and concealing their true, vile, violent nature. And do I expect the British cartoon to have this sort of opinion of the Nazis? Most likely. Because the British are democracy and they don't like authoritarian dictatorship regimes. And how do I write that out? How do I write out that the source has a political agenda? How do I establish that? I use my purpose technique of Famo. And so over here, suppose that I've gone with I do not trust. If I want to add one final sentence, I can use furthermore. So if I do not trust, I can use furthermore. If over here I started with I can trust, I can switch over to however. I'll put that out I'll put it up, and then you'll see. Okay, never mind. Let me just go to the meat of this. So say however or furthermore, I do not trust cartoon which criticized the Nazis for manipulating the mass media. Why? Because in 1935, Britain was a democracy, whereas Germany was an authoritarian dictatorship. And so this cartoon in the newspaper that most likely wanted to convince the British citizens that the Nazis were using mass media as political propaganda. They were hiding their true vile nature. They're just pretending to be professional so that British citizens would not be fooled by the propaganda and support Britain's democracy, and so as a hidden political agenda to promote Britain's political system, it cannot be trusted. Please highlight and analyze in this way. And how do I want you to write this on Foolscap? I'm conscious that I've almost taken 30 minutes in this video. Let me show you how to write, and then I'll move on to the second question, and then I'm done. So how do I want you to write it on Foolscap? I'd like you to write it like that. So please write it in you can write it in 2 paragraphs like that. First is the can trust, and then you do the critical analysis, and then try the do not trust. So this, copy the question onto Foolscap, write this as 1 or 2 paragraphs, write this as separate paragraph, and then below write this as well. Then let me zoom out. Okay, so this is what you should be having on Foolscap. Question 1, copy this, and copy this. And in the actual answering for a real exam, you can write either this or this plus this if you have time. So again, either one side or the other side. That's it. Okay, you can pause this, or I can zoom in for you, and you can copy this. Yeah, on Foolscap. Okay, let me move on to the second question. Sorry, I'm taking a bit of time. I wanted to go through this in a very systematic way. Let's look at this. David Lloyd George was British Prime Minister, writing a British newspaper in 1936 after a visit to Germany. Does Sorsby prove? So this is a reliability question. Hitler was a good leader for Germany, and this is a statement. So this is not a focus, it's a statement. I'm evaluating a statement, a claim here. So this is a claim or statement. It's not a focus. Is it true? Does Lloyd George really prove that this is the case? What does he say? Lloyd George says, I've just returned from Germany. I've now seen the famous leader and also something of the great change he has made. Whatever one may think of his methods, and certainly they are not those of a parliamentary country, he's making a snarky comment. He's just saying that Germany is authoritarian, it's not democratic. He's saying that Germany is not democratic. That's what he's saying. There can be no doubt that he has achieved a marvelous transformation. Marvelous is a very positive word. So this is very positive language. Positive praising tone. Take note of the tone. It is an emotional word, marvelous. Marvelous transformation in the spirit of the people and the economic and social outlook. One man has accomplished this miracle. Again, it's under emotional word. It's a positive praising tone. He's a born leader. This, in fact, if we were to, I'm not teaching you now, but in class, if you would want to ask, you can. If you were to analyze the tone of this source, you will conclude that it's unreliable, because someone who is using such emotional word is probably brainwashed. He's also securing the German people against the, securing means protecting. Against the constant dread of starvation, which was one of the worst memories. In other words, what is he saying? Does he prove that Hitler was a good leader? Well, he does, right? He says that Hitler has improved the livelihood and the confidence of ordinary Germans. He says achieve a marvelous transformation in the spirit. He is also here, right? Securing the German people against the constant. You know what? Factories, read the source, write the correct evidence on your own. Go and write this evidence. Okay, Sorsby proves that Hitler was a good leader. I want to do proofs. How do I do proofs? Because it is supported by my contextual knowledge. I know that Hitler did improve the German people's livelihood because they overcame the Great Depression. How? So let's use some knowledge. This will be under the economic impact. I know that unemployment fell tremendously. Do we have any facts on this? Do you have any numbers? So Hitler resolving unemployment through massive government spending on infrastructure, conscription, and rearmament. The right labor service. On page 68, send men to on public works. And over time, the Germans' lives improved. Nazis also organized the Strength Through Joy to provide leisure activities for German workers, such as cheap cinema tickets and organized trips and cruises. Okay, so there's knowledge that I have that indeed Hitler really helped the German people. Can I flip it? Can I do it the other way, that source B does not prove Hitler was a good leader? Can. Over here, source B does not prove that Hitler was a good leader. I leave you. I'm going to finish this video in 4 minutes. I leave you to do this on your own. Can you go and fill it out on your own? And then here, ultimately, here does not prove because it is challenged or it is contradicted. Please read this, analyze, understand, fill it up on your own. And then what about the final level? What about the final level? Looking at this, a former British Prime Minister who is obviously praising, really saying Hitler is so good. Is he reliable? What's his agenda? What's his skin in the game? What's his goal here? If you think about it deeply, for a British Prime Minister, and it's Lloyd George. Lloyd George was the leader of, let's write this. Lloyd George was the leader of Britain in World War I against Germany. If you think about it, he should be very suspicious of Hitler because Hitler is the guy that's doing conscription and rearmament. So Lloyd George should be saying, hey, Hitler's really evil. He's terrible. Let's be very skeptical and wary and suspicious of Hitler. And he's not. He's praising Hitler. He's going against what you think is his political agenda. And if you, my secretary, can realize that Lloyd George is going against his political agenda, you would have an insight that, hey, maybe this source is really extra reliable, that who you think is Hitler's opponent is praising him. And let's look at how I would write that. Ultimately, source B proves that Hitler was a good leader. Why? Because source B is an opinion by the former Prime Minister who led Britain and was one of the big three that wrote the punitive Treaty of Versailles to punish Germany in 1919. That was Lloyd George. Recall your chapter 1 knowledge. He should have a political agenda to convince Britain that Hitler was an evil leader. So that's what I think his political agenda should have been. But instead, he is going against his own political agenda to praise Hitler, which makes source B even more reliable and does prove that Hitler was a good leader. So this step in history and in social studies, reliability questions, this step is what we call the enhanced reliability, where you go against your own agenda. The source goes against its own agenda. Source goes. The enhanced reliability. Because it goes against its own agenda, it's even more reliable. Even more reliable. Even more reliable. Question 2. Again, copy both onto foolscap as well as the critical analysis. This one you can copy onto either paragraph. And in 2 minutes, I'm going to tell you how to do one thing here, which is this. cross-referencing to another source. This one I have not shown you yet. So far, I've used contextual knowledge for everything. And you should do that as a history student. But in the case where you tell me, Mr. Xiao, I have no knowledge, am I cooked? Am I cooked? My answer is, in general, yes, you are cooked because you need to have knowledge for history. But for certain skills and certain source-based case studies, there might be another source to help you. And how does the other source help you? And so, is source C reliable in its view of Hitler Youth camps? The command word is reliable. The view of Hitler Youth camps, this is the question focus. It could be positive view, it could be negative view. Let's take a look. Source C has this isn't camp life. No, sir. It's military barrack drill. Instead, we have military exercises down in the mud until we're exhausted. Well, looking at this, this is a, what do you think? It is a negative view. And so let's infer it's negative view of Hitler Youth camps. Why? Because it says that Hitler Youth camps are exhausting, punishing, and not enjoyable, and causes stress to the young Germans. Okay, so I have that, right? And then what does source D say? Source D says that most Hitler of the military discipline, they will plunge into ice cold water, forced to go on lengthy exercises. Well, does that support or contradict this? It supports source C, right? It supports. So source D supports source C. So source C is reliable because it's supported by source D, which also has a negative view of Hitler Youth camps. This is because Hitler Youth camps it's the same thing, right? Hitler Youth camps are exhausting, punishing, not enjoyable, and painful for the young Germans. And here in source D, I have the evidence, lengthy exercises, inadequate clothing, brutal punishments. All right, so how do I write that? You should write it like that. And this is how you would do a cross-reference to another source. Reliable because supported by the other source. And then you have to match. You have to match the inferences. Negative to negative. That's important. Okay, that's all I wanted to tell you for question 3. Question 3 is teaching you how to cross-reference to a different source. So for this video, I have taught you how to do reliability. In reliability, do you do answer the question, inference, cross-reference, and critical analysis of provenance? For cross-reference, you generally use our contextual knowledge, but in question 3, source C, I taught you how to use another source. Very briefly, go and read it on your own, go and think about it, and I'll also talk to you about critical analysis of provenance. And for today's video, I will end this here. The rest of the questions you can ask me in class. That's it for reliability. Thank you, Stack 3 students. See you in the next lesson.